Hi, welcome to Psi Curious. Thank you for joining us. This is another episode where I will go first in order to make people feel a little more comfortable about talking about their stories. This topic is one that I still have a hard time defining, but I'm going to call it a shared death experience because it's so unlike anything else that's happened to me, and other explanations I've been given just don't fit as well. Time out. I'm going to interrupt my own story because I think it's important that we do a quick dive into the definitions of near-death experience and shared death experience for anybody who doesn't know, so that the context of my story will make more sense, and also that you go in having a better understanding of what these two terms mean for future stories. They're coming up. So I'm going to do something I don't normally do, which is read something I've written, but I want to make sure I get the terminology right. I want to make sure I get the words that I've intended. So you don't have to hear a lot of what I mean is, or, so we're going to do something kind of, I don't love doing this, but we're going to switch over and I'm going to read a little bit of something to explain near-death and shared-death experiences, what they are and what the differences are. So a near-death experience describes firsthand experiences some people have when their physical body is near death or recently clinically dead. So right after they're clinically dead or right when they're almost deceased is when these experiences happen. The descriptions vary in detail, but there are commonalities. Starting with the person's awareness that their consciousness is leaving their physical body but remaining conscious of what is happening in that environment. Traveling out of that environment to other locales, sometimes quite close by, sometimes somewhere else on Earth. So if they're in an accident, sometimes they will leave their body and be in the vicinity of the accident where they can see what's happening. Sometimes if they're in a hospital, they'll go to other places in the hospital. Sometimes they'll go to other places on Earth to see what their loved ones are doing. Another common feature is traveling out of this realm into another realm that is almost universally described as blissful, ecstatic, purest unconditional love, peaceful, calm. This place that they often describe as feeling like home, whereas suddenly Earth doesn't feel like home. Now that they're in this place, they recognize that that's home. And they are often met and guided by a loved one or a guide, either in their transition from this realm to the other realm or once they arrive there. And as these are near-death experiences, the person is sent back into their body, sometimes with a choice, sometimes without. Pretty much everyone who reaches that place does not want to return because it's bliss. It's amazing. And coming back here, they know they're coming back into a body that's got some serious issues, right? They're almost dead. Oftentimes, survivors of near-death experiences return with enhanced psi or energetic sensitivities and skills, which is pretty cool. The details of these experiences are varied. So when you go online and you look up near-death experiences, the stories will have some commonalities like what we just went over, but the details are really different. Some of them will include a life review, some won't. Some will have an interaction with an ascended master or God, some won't. Some will report that they feel like they have been on the other side for a very long time, weeks and months, and they met all of their relatives and they understood what their life's purpose was, and they're really integrated into what happens on that side, and then they're told you got to go back, and then they come back and have the sense that no time has passed here, even though they feel like they've been gone a very long time. So many of the reports are that there is no time on the other side. Near-death experiences and shared death experiences are really similar. primary difference is that a near-death experiencer is in a physical body that is close to death. A shared death experiencer is in a perfectly healthy body, sharing the experience of someone who is close to death. So the shared death experiencer is healthy, and the near-death experiencer is dying. That's the big difference. Shared death experiences have some commonalities as well, and there are more or less two kinds of experiencers: those that are physically close to the dying person, and those that are not physically close to the dying person but are close to them emotionally. They have a greater emotional connection but are not in proximity. Now, experiencers who are not in proximity can often be alerted to what is happening by having a very strong and urgent thought about the person who is dying. Sometimes they'll share a physical symptom with the person who is dying. Say, if the person had a head injury, the shared death experiencer will have a headache. And sometimes they will have a sense of that person's presence as they are dying, even though they don't know that this is happening to the person who is, in fact, passing. So both kinds of shared death experiencers are sharing the experience of the dying person, witnessing many of the same features described in near-death experiences, and they'll accompany the dying to the other realm up until a point. Oftentimes, they will help the dying person actually transition fully to the other side. Many report that the dying person literally doesn't know how to let go and cross to the other side, and the shared death experiencer will have an intuition or an understanding of how to help them do that. Clearly, the shared death experiencer does not complete the death experience, and typically their consciousness will return to their body when the dying person has completed their transition to the other side. Both near-death and shared death experiencers are profoundly affected by their participation in this process, and they frequently report a diminished fear of dying, and they have a new appreciation for living. They live more peacefully, and they live more purposefully, and they live with the sense that this experience is a gift, and they know that they're going somewhere beautiful when they pass. So, taking that into account, I'll continue my story. Back the other, different clothes and hair. Anyway, just wanted to give you that quick bit of differentiation on what a shared death experience typically is and what a near-death experience typically is and how they differ from each other. And now I'm repeating myself. So, okay, back to the video. So, to make it as short as possible, my grandfather had a history of heart attacks. And my sister called me and said our grandfather had had another one and that she was coming to get me. She picked me up, took me back to our grandparents' house, and my grandfather was out in their back patio on the concrete, and there were neighbors all around with my grandmother. The paramedics were working on my grandfather because they would give him CPR and his heart would begin again. But as soon as they stopped to put him on the stretcher, it would stop. So basically his heart would only beat when he was having CPR. And my sister was in hysterics because my grandfather was her person. He was her special person. And my grandmother was in shock, and there were so many neighbors with her. And I was in shock at the scene I was seeing when suddenly I bilocated. And I don't know if that's a term you're familiar with. I only heard it about 2 or 3 years ago, and as soon as I heard it, it was like, yes, that exactly describes what happened to me. And it is having two perceptions at once. Your consciousness is in your body, experiencing what your body is seeing and what your body is feeling. And another consciousness that is also yours is somewhere else, seeing and experiencing what is happening somewhere else. And my two consciousnesses were running simultaneously. So one of me stayed in my body while my sister was hugging me around the shoulders and throat, facing over my shoulder. And the other me was up in the sky looking down on this whole scene. And I understood as soon as it happened that that was my grandfather's consciousness, that I was sharing his perspective on what was happening. And I looked down at myself and I saw me looking up, and it I was only 15. I didn't have any tools for this, but the good thing is that I just went with it. I just went with, okay, this is happening. And as I realized I was looking at my grandfather on the ground from his perspective, I knew that he was ready to go. He'd had heart attacks over almost 2 decades, and they weren't able to keep him going with the CPR that they were doing enough to get him into the ambulance and into a hospital. And so I said to him in my head, from this space up in the sky that I was sharing with him, it's okay, you can go. And that was it. The connection was closed. I was 100% back in my body now. My sister was still crying, wrapped around my neck. And I heard the paramedics say, we can't get him back. And they called it. And they loaded him into the ambulance to take to the hospital to get a call from a doctor that, in fact, there was nothing else they could do. And I didn't have word like shared death experience. I didn't have a term for it. I didn't have an understanding of what had just happened to me until, many, many years later when I read an article about shared death experiences. I didn't find it as profound in the moment as I did reflecting back on it. In the moment, it felt completely natural. It felt normal. It felt like I was able to roll with the punches in a way I wouldn't have anticipated if you had told me it was going to happen. But it just was a very calm, placid experience, and letting him know that he didn't have to fight to stay anymore seemed 100% natural. It didn't even seem like a thought I was having. It was just sort of an expression from my soul to his soul. Thank you again for joining us for these stories. If you've had something like this happen and you want to share it with us, by all means, leave a comment below or drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. Maybe we can share your story as one of our interviews. That would be a delight. And in the meantime, thank you again for joining us. And I'm so glad you're here.